and health. Education. We have the evidence-based interventions that we know promote child development. It's things like universal preschool. Head Start is amazing. Kids get 2/3 of their meals in Head Start. We have evidence on the efficacy of these interventions. Early literacy programs, school health services. Nutrition plays a tremendous role. And as you've heard in Flint, we have no full-scale grocery stores. We have none. It is a food desert. My clinic, our pediatric clinic, which sees most of the Flint kids, is on the second floor of a farmer's market, purposefully to address food insecurity issues. Short term, we need diets high in iron, calcium, vitamin C. Long term, we need good nutrition to promote brain development. It's a no-brainer. Pardon the pun. And then education or healthcare. We need kids to go to their medical homes. This is not a reason for pop-up clinics. We need long-term neurodevelopmental follow-up for our children. The sooner I pick up a delaying clinic, the sooner that kids get their services, the better their outcomes. We need mental health services. There is a lot that we need that you can help us with.
Dr. Attisha,
Yes.
excuse me, Hanna-Attisha,
No, that's fine.
fabulous, and we're going to hear more during the Q&A.
Okay.
Unfortunately, we have to
Sorry.
leave to all of my colleagues. We have to leave to vote now with a brisk pace, and we'll come back here from the other witnesses and then be able to hear some more. First, you traumatized us, then you gave us hope, so thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, it was for your great testimony. Excuse us, we'll be back very fast. Thank you.
She wants it. That's probably good, right?
Yes.
Ladies and gentlemen, members are headed back down from the floor. We are going to restart momentarily, so if you could please take your seat, that would be wonderful. Thank you. These are the members that have been here.
Okay, that's all. Okay. Good afternoon. As members are returning to hear the rest of our witnesses' testimonies, and thank you again, Dr. Hanna-Attisha, for your excellent presentation, I just want to acknowledge that this afternoon we had been joined by the Dean of the Michigan delegation, John Conyers, Congresswoman Debbie Dingell, whom we acknowledged earlier, Representative Matt Cartwright of Pennsylvania, Marcy Kaptur of Ohio, Raul Grijalva, whom I acknowledged earlier, from Arizona, Frank Pallone, the ranking member on the Energy and Commerce Committee from New Jersey, Judy Chu from California, Lois Frankel from Florida, Donald Norcross from New Jersey, Mark DeSaulnier from California, Diana DeGette from Colorado, Congressman Welsh from Vermont, Bobby Scott, ranking member on the Education and Labor Committee, which has the jurisdiction over Head Start and some of the early childhood education initiatives, Eric Swalwell from California. Eric is the head of our Future Forum, reaching out to millennials. We're also joined by our distinguished chairman of our caucus, Javier Becerra. Other members will be coming. Is he here? He was here earlier, yes, I know. And the members will be returning, but we wanted to get back so we could start the hearing. And who are we going to go now? Do you want to introduce him?
And thank you very much. And now we'll hear from Dr. Yanna Lambrinidou. I apologize.
Why don't you teach us all how to say your beautiful name? It was Greek? Is it Greek?
It is Greek.
Yeah, beautiful.
Yanna Lambrinidou.
Thank
you.
Doctor.
Leader Pelosi and Congressman Kildee and members of the House Democratic Steering and Policy Committee, I thank you for inviting me to testify at this hearing. Given the issue in front of us, we are on sacred ground, indeed. My name is Yanna Lambrinidou. I'm the president of Parents for Nontoxic Alternatives. I'm affiliate faculty at Virginia Tech and have worked on lead in drinking water for the past 9 years. I recently served on an EPA advisory group to develop recommendations for improving the federal lead and copper rule. I dissented from my colleagues. The science says it clearly. Flint and Washington, D.C. before it are not outliers. They are canaries in a coal mine. Lead in drinking water is underestimated and inadequately addressed. Assurances that our water is safe to drink do not disclose 3 things. First, even though there is no safe level of lead in water, utility compliance with the lead and copper rule allows for up to 10% of homes to dispense any amount of lead whatsoever, and for all homes to dispense up to 15 parts per billion lead. Simply put, the current rule leaves room for large-scale chronic and acute exposures to lead in drinking water. Second, the EPA sampling protocol does not capture worst-case lead levels in lead service line homes, which can be extremely high. A new industry study found that if these levels were captured, 50 to 70% of utilities with lead service lines would exceed the lead and copper rule standard today. This means that up to 96 million people who are currently assured that their water is safe to drink would receive alerts about widespread lead contamination. Third, many utilities add extra steps to how they sample that are known to miss lead problems. Despite these deficiencies, just between 2000 and 2004, almost 300 utilities exceeded the lead and copper rule lead standard. These exceedances alone placed 11.5 million people at risk of exposure for weeks, months, and potentially even years. What separates Flint and Washington, D.C. from these cases is that in Flint and D.C., the harm was documented and disclosed. It resulted in elevated blood levels among children, as Dr. Mona just discussed, and in D.C., in increased miscarriages and fetal deaths. It is urgent that the lead and copper rule be fixed. At the very least, we need methodical removal of all lead service lines, and funding for this removal has to become a national priority. Second, tap monitoring and corrosion control requirements that are designed to address worst-case lead in highest-risk homes. Third, robust public education that discloses the prevalence and risks of lead in drinking water and gives people the tools to protect themselves even when their water utility meets lead and copper rule standards. Fourth, complete transparency of all lead-related data and activities. Congressman Kildee has drafted a very important bill on this. Fifth, citizen involvement in all programs concerning lead in water. We must not forget that Flint and D.C. were both discovered by parents whose children got hurt. Community voices are critical for repairing the lead and copper rule. Sixth, funding of EPA's severely underfunded Water Infrastructure Research Branch, which can help utilities implement the lead and copper rule in a public health protective manner. And last but not least, an EPA that enforces its own regulation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I was saying this is a very emotional day for all of us. Thank you for the passion you have for this issue and the dispassionate approach that you are taking to it. Since I announced earlier all the members who were here before the break, I want to acknowledge that we've been joined by the distinguished ranking member on the Appropriations Committee, DeLauro of New York. We're very pleased that Brenda Lawrence, who has been a champion on this issue day in and day out, every minute, is with us as well. Jared Hoffman of California, Al Green of Texas, Jan Chakowski of Illinois, and Congresswoman Barbara Lee of California. I acknowledged all of you early. Those of you who are here this morning. Bobby, I acknowledged you earlier. Told them that you were the man to see about Head Start. And we're now joined by Hank Johnson of Georgia. I want to acknowledge who goes next.
And at this time, we'd like to hear from Dr. Eric Scorsone.
Thank you, Leader Pelosi, Congressman Edwards, Congressman Kildee, and members of the House Democratic Policy Steering Committee. I'd like to pick up on a point that Dr. Mona made about the water switch, because the water switch is at the core of what happened here, and we look at why that happened. Municipal governments are at the bottom of a fiscal food chain, and unfortunately, in that circumstances, the state governments often push their problems down to the local governments. And we've essentially created a system where these kind of risks are elevated, and in Michigan in particular. I want to give you some statistics that kind of show where Flint stands, for example. Flint has lost half of its tax base just in the last 7 years. The city struggles to provide basic municipal services under these circumstances. Since 2001, the state of Michigan has cut $50 million of state revenue sharing to the city government. Also, the income tax the city has dropped dramatically. How are all of these tied to the water system? Because to provide basic municipal services such as police and fire, the city had to divert water and sewer funds back almost 10 years ago. That meant the maintenance was not available for the funding of the sewer and water system, and other problems occurred. When the emergency managers were appointed, their first action was to raise water rates dramatically, which of course put a lot of economic harm on citizens. So the pendulum kept swinging, and the city government couldn't find stability. And I believe at the heart of this crisis is these fiscal challenges that the city faces. Ultimately, as Congressman Kildee mentioned, the emergency managers were in charge. But the emergency managers don't come with lots of money or assistance that they're going to provide to cities. They are essentially an accounting solution to what is a structural deficit. If it was an accounting problem, perhaps that would be okay, but these are not accounting problems. These are structural problems. The city government, just to give you an example, has lost half of its purchasing power in 7 years. The city struggles not only with its water system, but police, fire, and other services. And the water system crisis is spilling over to these other basic municipal services, as the mayor can attest to. I believe basically we have created a system in Michigan and many other states where our municipal governments will struggle to provide basic services and infrastructure. And until we address this problem, there will be the risk of other problems such as this occurring in other communities across the United States. If we balance budgets, that's not simply enough. We have to consider the public health, safety, and welfare of what those decisions mean, and often the unintended consequences that comes with short-term budget balancing acts. What I would ask for is to think about a new partnership between all three levels of government, federal, state, and local. We have to fund infrastructure. We have to fund basic municipal services. The states have cut back dramatically to address their problems, and unfortunately that has left municipal governments with little room to go. They face tax restrictions, state-mandated spending. We have created a structural deficit. That may be okay for a wealthier community, but for a community like Flint, it is very difficult. So I would call for looking at infrastructure financing and other programs that would assist these communities to ensure that these infrastructure challenges can be addressed and these kind of problems will not occur in any other American city.
Thank you very much, Dr. Scorsone. We've been joined again by Representative Dan Kildee, who was on the floor passing his bill of 400 and something to 2. He is going to recognize our witnesses and perhaps brag about his bill to us. But before you do, may I acknowledge that we have a former mayor in the audience here from Atlanta, Shirley Franklin, who was here as part of the Conference of Mayors Intellectual Resources, but also an expert on water issues. Thank you for joining us there with Tom Cochran from the U.S. Conference of Mayors. Been very active in this. Yield to Mr. Kildee.
Well, thank you, and I appreciate the leader mentioning the legislation that we just passed on the floor of the House would require immediate notice by the EPA whenever these elevated levels come to their attention. As we know, in the case of Flint, the EPA kept insisting that the Michigan Department of Environmental Quality do their job, and of course they didn't. It wouldn't have prevented the state from making the bad choices they made, but we would have caught it far sooner. And we do have a great panel, and I believe, are we at Mr. Tawwab at this point?
Yes, Tawwab.
Okay.
Mr. Tawwab.
Bilal Tawwab, who's the superintendent of Flint schools, and a good friend.
All right, thank you. Minority Leader Pelosi, Representative Kildee, and honorable members of the committee. Once again, my name is Bilal Tawwab, Superintendent of Flint Community Schools, and I am pleased to testify on behalf of the more than 5,400 students of Flint Community Schools and the emergency situation facing our educational community as a result of the Flint water crisis. Permit me to clarify the impact of this emergency from the point of view of our students. In August 2015, I started as superintendent of Flint Community Schools. And in September 2015, I was faced with making a decision that no one should have to make. In September 2015, after listening to the press conference led by Dr. Hanna-Attisha, I made the decision that no student of Flint Community Schools will drink the water. Since my decision, we have supplied students with bottled water. Flint Community Schools has been operating in crisis mode since last September. Now, when I visit a classroom, I find cases of water for student consumption or a bottle of water on a student's desk. My students cannot even walk to the nearest fountain to quench their thirst. This has become their new normal. Excuse me. For our students, life has changed. There is the constant stress over unsafe water that disrupts the life of a community that already face a multitude of challenges. These circumstances make providing a sound and joyful education even more difficult when students cannot use the drinking fountains or wash an apple off to eat. We are counseling students and families on managing risk of lead contamination. There's an inherent struggle between trying to balance the educational needs of the students while meeting their physical and emotional needs in light of this crisis. Across the city, a threat of significant disability is even more serious for Flint's youngest students, those not yet in school or the unborn. We have to be practical and organized to support these children, and as Dr. Hanna-Attisha has argued, education and a nutritional diet can help mitigate the effects of lead exposure. We must stay ahead of this aspect of the water crisis so that we do not create additional complications. These children will require our dedicated support as much as 2 years before they would normally be enrolled in an early childhood education program. Some young children who are not yet school age will have unknown health and educational needs that the Flint Community Schools will need to address. While the effects of lead poisoning on our children cannot be fully reversed, there are things we can do to assist our children and provide them full wraparound services. The Flint Community Schools will need additional support in the form of expanded special education resources. We need lead-free facilities for all students. We need lead-free facilities for all students so that we can focus on what matters most, and that is teaching and learning. We need resources to measure the intellectual and emotional damage done to each and possibly every child. This will require complete testing, both medical and intellectual assessments, to understand the magnitude of our issues. We need early intervention programs to provide the educational support that each student will have the opportunity to lead a productive life, and a year-round schooling to deliver these services. We need the resources to attract and retain talented specialists who are trained in special learning needs. These needs are crucial at a time when the district has a looming deficit of over $10 million. We need your leadership in realizing that this is an evolving educational emergency, and we haven't the time for 5-year planning cycles. We need support now and into the future. I am asking the members of this committee and your colleagues in Congress to join me, our teachers, principals, and parents in remediating this crisis and in making Flint a better and safer and more secure place to raise and educate a child. Our current situation is an anxious, heartbreaking challenge, but it is a challenge we face now and well into the foreseeable future. As superintendent, I am dedicated to providing a quality education to all of our students. Every child matters in Flint. And therefore, I conclude by reminding you that Flint has lost jobs, we have lost infrastructure, we have lost families from our public schools, and now our students have lost faith in our institutions. The day has come to stop asking the children of Flint community to pay the price for mistakes made by others. On behalf of the children of Flint, the students that we serve, and the employees of the Flint Community Schools, I thank you for your interest and your support.
Thank you, Bilal. That was obviously heartfelt, and I appreciate your testimony. When she was elected mayor of Flint in November of 2015, the office to which she was elected had precious little political power associated with it formally, because that power had been suspended through Michigan's emergency management law. But what she had was a mandate from the people that elected her, and she's used that mandate to lead. One of her first acts was to declare a state of emergency in the city of Flint, which triggered a lot of action, including our presence here today. So I'm very happy to have Mayor Karen Weaver with us. Mayor Weaver.
Thank you. To the Honorable Leader, Nancy Pelosi, Co-Chair Rosa DeLauro, and Donna Edwards, and all of the other esteemed members of this committee. Let me begin by thanking Chairman Jason Chavez and Elijah Cummings for starting the congressional hearings on this important issue last week. I need to thank the U.S. Conference of Mayors for standing with me today, and thank you to the president of the conference, Baltimore Mayor Stephanie Rawlings Blake, for offering and lending your support. I also need to thank Congresswoman Brenda Lawrence and Congressman Dan Kildee. Thank you so much. Thank you, Leader Pelosi, for giving me the opportunity to come before you today. I am humbled and I'm honored. My name is Karen Williams Weaver, and I am mayor of the city of Flint in the Great Lakes state of Michigan. The Great Lakes happen to be the largest fresh surface water system on the earth, but in Flint we can't drink the water. I'm hoping that my presence, as well as my testimony today, will help move this process forward. On December 14th of 2015, I held a press conference in Flint where I declared a man-made disaster. My beloved hometown has had its water supply poisoned by lead, which means it's undrinkable. It can't be used for cooking, and although experts claim it's safe to bathe in and to wash one's clothes in, the citizens of Flint complained of skin rashes, hair loss, and other ailments that they attribute to the water. The water supply in Flint is also unsafe for animals and pet owners. Pet owners have been instructed to give their pets bottled water only. The most vulnerable people have been pregnant mothers, babies, and children up to the age of 6, as well as those with compromised immune systems and the elderly. As a licensed clinical psychologist, I know firsthand the effects of lead poisoning on children. It's toxic to many organs and tissues, resulting in permanent learning and behavior disorders, lowered IQ, developmental delays, cognitive deficits. As mayor of Flint, I've witnessed businesses closing, people getting sick and moving out. Our tax base has eroded. Fear, frustration, and anger are beginning to consume residents who are already dealing with high unemployment, lack of jobs, loss of trust and confidence in government officials who have had charge over them. We are a people who have had our democratic rights taken away from us by emergency manager law that has been imposed on us in Michigan. Our elected officials have no power to govern themselves, and there's no accountability for what these managers do because they report only to the governor. We have been subjected to this law since 2011, and because of decisions made under this law, we now find ourselves in this situation. Flint has faced challenges before, but this situation has taken our rights away as citizens of this great nation. And when these decisions are made, the people of Flint basically have taxation without representation. We are living day to day, getting bottled water from fire stations and other designated sites. And thanks to the generous donation of people from around the country, we appreciate it. We're grateful for the outpouring of our fellow citizens for the water donations. However, this is a Band-Aid fix, and people want and deserve a more permanent solution in regard to fixing our pipes and service lines to individuals' homes. I've submitted a plan to do this. I believe this is a solution that can be expedited and an end to this man-made disaster. Flint is ready to move now on $55 million Fast Start program to address the immediate needs of renovating 15,000 local service lines at our houses. I am pleased that this morning the Office of the Governor announced that it would move to create $25 million fund to begin Fast Start. But we need that other $30 million too, whether from the state or the federal government or both. Beyond the Fast Start effort to address the immediate crisis at the service lines, we will need what may be hundreds of millions of dollars to address the broader crisis to the overall Flint water system. I'm grateful that the state of Michigan will consider an additional package of $195 million announced today, and I am hopeful, and now we know, that Congress will take up our Congressman Kildee's proposed Families of Flint Act to provide more. But our needs and our crisis go far beyond the immediate drinking water contamination. I support the Michigan congressional delegation's efforts for federal funding that includes funding for infrastructure, education, and health services, and many other things that my community needs. The Families of Flint Act that has been proposed in the House is a step in the right direction because it would provide resources to address the short-term water infrastructure crisis as well as resources for our longer-term challenges to children's health, children's development, job and economic development, and other key factors necessary for dignified and productive lives for the people of Flint, all of which have been put at tremendous risk by our water crisis. Flint needs to address the short-term water crisis and longer-term challenge of rebuilding, revitalizing and remaining a viable and sustainable community. We need the resources in the Families of Flint Act from the federal government. We need the state of Michigan to lead with resources to rectify this crisis, and we need bipartisan support now to move Flint forward. I implore you on behalf of the citizens of Flint to help us restore our city and rebuild trust and confidence in our government. I submit to you that we are not disposable people.
Madam Chair, with your permission, before we hear from our questioners, let us give a standing ovation to this excellent panel.
Thank you.
So wonderful. Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you. Distinguished witnesses. Yield back.
Thank you, Madam Leader, and thank you to our witnesses. Such an incredibly compelling panel. We're going to handle questions now. We have a couple of members who, one member at least, who has to leave, and we want to hear from the Michigan delegation as well. And as you can see, we have such huge interest in our caucus in the testimony that you have today. And so we will ask each member to hold their questions to 2 minutes so that we can can hear from this panel rather extensively. We're going to begin with the ranking member from the Oversight and Government Reform Committee, Elijah Cummings of Maryland. I understand that Mr. Cummings has to leave, and so we'd appreciate it if he would be able to ask his question.
Thank you very much, and I want to thank you all for calling this hearing today. And I got to tell you that I am upset that the governor's not here, but I promise you, to the panel and to Madam Mayor, there's not one day that goes by that I'm not in the ear of Chairman Chaffetz saying that we got to get the governor here, and we will get him here. But anyway, let me move on. To Dr. Hanna-Attisha, I'd like to ask you about a document that appears to show that the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services knew about lead poisoning in Flint's children before you released your test results. This document is dated July 27, 2015, and it appears to have been prepared by the epidemiology section of the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services. It describes an internal study that found lead poisoning based on blood tests of the children of Flint. The report states, and I quote, "The positive tests for elevated lead blood levels were higher than usual for children under the age of 16 living in the city of Flint during the months of July, August, and September 2014. Dr. Hanna-Attisha, that was a period immediately after the switch to the Flint water system in April 2014, is that right?
Yes.
And do you read this as I do, that the lead levels in the blood of the Flint children were higher than usual immediately after the switch to the Flint River, is that right?
Yes.
And those blood tests would have been reported to the state, is that correct?
Yes.
And if this information was reported to the state officials, what do you believe their responsibility would be, and what steps should they have taken?
Further investigation. You don't mess around with higher than normal lead levels.
So I think we need to find out what happened to this information after it was obtained. Would you agree?
Yes.
The state of Michigan appears to have known for months before the public about the increase in lead levels in the children. We have asked the Governor Snyder to produce documents, including information that would identify who knew what about when, and he has not done that so far. And if the buck stops with the Governor Snyder, as he says, he needs to answer these questions and produce these documents. Today's hearing must address those issues. I promise you we will get to the bottom of this, and we will not rest. And I want to thank my colleagues, Madam Chairman, Madam Speaker, for all of us showing up. We care. We want Flint to know we care, and we will do everything in our power to be of assistance. I yield back.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cummings. Thank you. At this time, I want to make sure to acknowledge that we've also been joined by the following members: Catherine Clark of Massachusetts, our Vice Chairman Joe Crowley of New York, the gentleman from California, Mr. Garamendi, Terry Sewell from Alabama, Representative G.K. Butterfield, also the Chairman of the Congressional Black Caucus. Thank you for joining us. And at this time, I'd like to recognize the three members who are here from Michigan, Representative Dan Kildee, Representative Debbie Dingell, and Representative Brenda Lawrence, each for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If I could just quickly ask a couple of questions, starting with Dr. Scorsone. Your testimony addressed the financial challenges to the city of Flint. As we are preparing for what we will advocate on behalf of the community, the city of Flint, I wonder if you might help us understand a little more about the challenges that you see going forward. And I contextualize it by saying this. One of the most frustrating aspects of this crisis, of the many frustrating aspects, is to hear the governor of the state of Michigan attempt to impugn civil servants and to blame people who get up every day and go to work at City Hall or in the water department for this crisis, when it was political. It were political decisions and financial decisions made far above that pay grade that led to this. The reason I say that is, even if we're able to get the pipes fixed and get some help to these kids, the city of Flint has a real challenge ahead of it just to provide basic services. Could you, if you were in a position to replace the emergency manager law with a set of solutions that really would make a difference for a place like Flint, what would that look like?
And Representative Dingell, we'll take the 3 questions and then give the panel an opportunity to answer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I've got so many different questions, and 2 minutes isn't a lot. As some of you know, I've spent a lot of time with the families in Flint, and I'm most concerned about the children and whether they have the resources that they need or even the information. So I've met a number of children who have immediate healthcare needs, and it's not clear to me that the resources are available in the city for not only the lead poisoning that we're finding that isn't in the blood, but bacteria in the stomach, stomach ulcers, esophagus inflammations. So what is being done in the city of Flint for these children that have immediate needs? And then if I'm a parent, the very adult, the confusing information where the governor of the state is saying that it's safe to bathe in the water. The state of Michigan posts a flyer saying it's safe to bathe your child, and the Attorney General, who's also of that party, but I don't believe this should be partisan, says if I had a child, I wouldn't let them bathe. So nobody's even, at this point, the information is so confusing still months later. How do you clarify? How do you do that? And then, Madam Mayor, you took the first positive statement I've seen anybody do in the last few weeks when you announced a plan to begin to replace the pipes yesterday. So congratulations on beginning to get that in place, and other people are trying to help you. But where is the money coming from? Has that source been identified, and how much of the problems will it take care of in the city of Flint? Thank you.
Representative Lawrence.
I want to first just recognize the civic heroes we've been talking about, Dr. Attisha, Mayor Weaver, and Superintendent. I just want to say thank you. There comes a time when, and we clearly have seen a failure of our government, where the people of this great country have stepped forward, and you can be listed as among those in our history. I want to repeat a pledge that I have made, and I want to find out why this happened, how it happened, who knew, and what did they do after they found out. Why is that critical? That is critical because never again in America should this happen. Should we, the basic trust that we have in our government, that when we turn on a faucet that we can drink water that will not harm us, is a basic human right in these United States of America. So some call it finger pointing. I really am not interested where the finger points, but I want the facts and I want the data so that we can move forward. Secondly, my question to the superintendent of schools. This issue of taking care of our children in the school system goes way beyond that, because these are children, as you stated, who have not entered into the K through 12 system. So the commitment, and where are we with the early childhood development? And something that wasn't mentioned, to address the health concerns that these children are having, nutrition. Where are we, and what can the federal government do with this nutrition issue that must be addressed? And I know Head Start brings some of that to the table because they provide breakfast, lunch. Those are things. And my last question for you is, where's the federal government, in your opinion, now? And how can we do it better to take care of you as we get to the point of replacing and getting the funds to replace the infrastructure? And again, thank you so much. And to the experts that are here to guide us through this process, we have to have the facts and the data. And I appreciate everything that you've brought to the table. Thank you so much.
So, thank you very much. What we'll do, I want to make sure to acknowledge that we've also been joined by Representative Maxine Waters, our ranking Democrat on the Financial Services Committee, Representative Sander Levin, ranking member of Ways and Means, and Representative Keith Ellison of Minnesota. Thank you for joining us as well. And if the panel would go ahead, beginning with the mayor, and address the... that's right. We were completing, Mr. Levin, we were just just completing questions for 2 minutes from the Michigan delegation, and then we'll allow the panel to respond to the concerns that you've raised. So if you have a question now, please address it to the panel.
Thank you so much. I was delayed because we're having a hearing with the Secretary of HHS, and I took my time, my 3 minutes, to discuss with her what HHS was doing. So let me just quickly focus on this to drive home the message. Some of us had a chance over the weekend to be in Flint, and the stories that we were told, especially by the individual families, were more than overpowering. In a sense, they were unanswerable, except we have to have an answer. And I think it's really characteristic, if I might say so, of this Steering and Policy Committee to tackle these issues, because this isn't Flint, this is America, the whole country. So why don't you, if you would, I'm going to go back to HHS, to that hearing, and maybe have a further chance to ask the Secretary. Let's talk for just a minute about the health needs in the less than minute there is, or is that going to come later? I just raised the questions.
Raise the questions.
Huh? So if you would tackle the various health issues that these children face, and how there's going to be the oversight to make sure that we know their health conditions as they unfold. Tell us, if you would, about what's needed in terms of health care within the schools, because we were shocked. I think in the elementary schools, there's one in the entire school system, one school social worker, and we were told when we were there, and I finished with this, we were told by parents about the behavioral issues with their kids. So I'd like, I'm glad to be able, Madam Chairman, to add questions like that.
Thank you. We'll begin with the mayor, and just note that we've also been joined by our Democratic whip, Mr. Hoyer of Maryland. Madam Mayor.
Okay. The question was regarding the Fast Start program and removal of those lead service lines. One of the things I did do was got in touch with Lansing because I knew they had some experience and expertise in this. I know that the Office of the Governor has announced that it would create a $25 million fund to begin Fast Start, but we know that's not enough. The proposal is $55 million. I have not heard yet. I'm waiting to hear if there is going to be some immediate funds released for us to get started, because the goal is for us to possibly start in less than a month. We need to do this immediately. And I hope when I leave here, I have that good news that this money has been released for us to get started immediately.
I would like to address Mr.
Dr. Tawwab.
Okay. I'm going to speak to the early childhood status where we are. So now we are working closely with the state of Michigan to expand our early childhood programs. We are now assessing closed schools. We're looking to possibly reopen schools so that we are able to increase the number of seats in early childhood. Understand that we need roughly 2,000 seats for Flint. And so how do we begin to make that happen? We are looking at trying to open some classrooms within the next month, actually. So we are moving quickly, but understand that we have a large population of students that we must serve. And so right now, it feels like sort of a drop in the bucket. So we definitely are going to need more support in that area. And to your question regarding where the federal government is now in terms of its support, I would say my greatest concern is that we need to keep in mind that we're going to be facing this issue for over 20 years. So with that being said, I know we're talking a lot about funding and supports now, but 10 years, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years from now, will those resources be secure for Flint? So that would be my question to the federal government.
Madam Mayor?
May I add one other thing? Because Congressman Kildee brought this up, and you were talking about being able to run City Hall and what's happened as a result of being under emergency manager. One of the first things that I've noticed when I got into City Hall, it was very obvious that we have been stripped of capacity. If nothing were going on in City Hall, if it was everyday life in City Hall without a crisis, we are understaffed. With a crisis, I believe it's to the point of negligence that we do not have the capacity to do things that are necessary to take care of business. So I just wanted to add that because you brought that up. Thank you.
And Dr. Scorsone, if you wanted to respond to the questions from the Michigan delegation.
Sure. I think the question, and it goes to the mayor's point, the city budget's been cut in half. The staffing's been cut by 2/3. The water crisis is affecting the entire city government. I believe the state and federal governments need long-term revenue sharing or other state aid that is going to help stabilize the situation. The mayor is absolutely right. The situation is very extreme. I've never, quite honestly, seen anything like it in any city government. I would also suggest about increased support investment for infrastructure maintenance and renewal is going to be absolutely crucial, not just to Flint, but to other cities. So I would suggest those are the kind of things that are needed long-term, not just this year, to stabilize, because the water crisis will affect police, fire, other basic municipal services as well.
And Dr. Lambrinidou and Dr. Hanna-Attisha, if you could address the questions that were raised by Ms. Dingle on the health impacts for children.
So the immediate health impacts could be from lead, or they could be from the other toxic soup that was in this water. So we had high levels of bacteria. Then we dumped a lot of chlorine, which irritated people's skin and eyes. Then we had 9 months of safe drinking water violations of a chlorine disinfectant, total trihalomethanes. And just last night, we had a water main break, and now we have a boil advisory, and boiling concentrates lead in your food. So there are a lot of immediate problems that could be related to lead, or they could not be related to lead, or it could be other water-related things. And we are encouraging everybody to go to their medical home. They need to go to their primary care doctor, because this is a long-term problem that needs long-term follow-up and continuity of care. We also have a children's hospital in the middle of Flint, Hurley Children's Hospital where I'm at, and we have every specialty that you can think of. So we can treat these children now, but they need to get to their provider, and access is a huge barrier. Every day in my clinic, about 30 to 40% of my patients don't show up, not because they don't love their children and want to do best for their kids, but because they have every barrier in the world to get there. Pre-existing, we have a 40% poverty rate. We have no transportation. Lots of barriers for children to succeed and to get the care that they need. Bathing and messaging, so the jury's out. Nobody knows what is going on with bathing. Lead, by and large, doesn't go through your skin, but this water has so many other things in it. And now the EPA, thank God, is on the ground, and they're looking at copper levels and nickel levels and all these other things that could be skin irritants, and they're creating a registry on rashes. Health needs. What are our health needs? Tremendous. So we need to build a workforce capacity to deal with these potential complications. We have one pediatric psychiatrist in the city. We need to think forward in regards to building that mental health community, building those primary care providers. It is hard to recruit doctors to Flint. My main job as a residency director, I train future pediatricians, and it is a challenge to bring people to Flint. But the fix is not just health, it's education, it is early intervention. If we pay for Head Start, we don't have to pay for special education. And these are the things that you can help us fund. And it's also nutrition. We have, like I said, no full-service grocery stores. We have an incredible farmers market, but it is a challenge for our families to get the nutrition. And in the short term and the long term, these are the evidence-based interventions that will promote child brain development so that we do not see the full consequences of this disaster.
Nita, do you have any response to the Michigan delegation questions?
I think I want to add that how important the focus is on lead in drinking water in schools, obviously, and that we lack federal regulations that require testing or remediation of lead in drinking water in schools, or even notification that there's a problem. So our schools nationally are in a regulatory black hole. They are not covered by the lead and copper rule, and I think it's a hole that we should be paying attention to.
Thank you. At this time, we'll hear 2 minutes each of questions from our leadership. We'll begin in the order of appearance here on the panel. We'll begin with our chairman, Javier Becerra, then our vice chair, Joe Crowley, and of course our esteemed whip, Mr. Hoyer.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and to all of you, I want to say thank you for your testimony, your moving testimony, and thank you for your perseverance. It's actually kind of hard to believe that in the 21st century we're having a panel testify to this, that there was such wholesale failure of accountability, dereliction of responsibility here that could affect the lives of so many people, until you remember that we had Katrina. And once again, it's not nature that does it to us. These are man-made crises. Mayor Weaver, I have a question for you. We have now seen Congress twice invite Governor Snyder to come before Congress to inform us, to explain to us how this could have happened, who was involved, and what's being done to mitigate as quickly as possible. Twice now he has either refused or declined to accept the invitation. I'm wondering if you could tell me what level of communication do you have with the governor on this issue, and what types of information and answers is he providing you with regard to the state's role in this, because it seems like we still don't have the answers as to who was involved, what they did, and why they did it, and why they haven't responded more quickly. And I got to believe that while Governor Snyder's unwilling to talk to us, I got to believe he's been willing to talk to the mayor of the city that's been impacted. So if you could give us a response to that, I'd be interested in knowing. And again, I thank you all for everything you're doing. And please know that for many of us, we can't let this go, because we can't just treat this as if it happened only in Flint. I'm from Los Angeles, California. I have a situation with a battery plant that deposited countless amounts of lead in probably 10,000 neighborhood homes, and so we're going to fight this as well, but we're not going to let this go.
Mr. Crowley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mayor, I just want to ask you, Mr. Tawwab, if I could as well, with all due respect to the other panelists, you all can answer this question, but I'm just going to ask these two. When you were growing up, did you have a sense that someone was looking after you?
Yes.
You had that feeling that maybe it was your parents, or maybe it was a minister, or it could have been a bigger brother or sister or a neighbor, but you always felt that someone had your back, right? It could be a doctor, it could be, but you didn't feel that abandonment, did you?
No.
I gather, Madam Mayor, from your testimony that we may be looking at a generation of people from Flint who really will forever question whether anyone really has their back. And I think the importance of the turnout of the folks that are here today from all over the country is that if we as a Congress fail to have the back of Flint, Michigan, we are sending a message to our own constituents that this country does not have their back. And I applaud Leader Pelosi, all the members of the Michigan delegation who are here today, because this is not a fight just for Flint and for Michigan. It's a fight for the soul of our country as to what we stand for and what we're willing to do to help our fellow Americans in a time of disaster, whether it be man-made or a natural disaster. I know there's a difference here, but a cup of water is natural, and the most basic need that we have. And if people feel as though they don't have clean drinking water, they certainly have to question whether anyone ever has their back. I want the people of Flint to know I'm there. I want to be there for them. This Congress needs to be there for them. Their nation needs to be there for them. So thank you for your testimony today.
Thank you. Mr. Hoyer?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and witnesses, thank you very much for being here. I apologize for my lateness. We had votes, and then I had meetings scheduled, so I was late, but I wanted to be here. For the same reason that Mr. Crowley said, first of all, to give the people of Flint the understanding, Madam Mayor, and you'll take back, this is an extraordinary array of members of Congress who have come out in the afternoon after votes because of their great concern. And Madam Mayor, I know you have a real challenge. When I speak to mayors, I said I've been a legislator now for almost 50 years, 12 years in the Senate, 36 years here, and I tell them, if you have half a brain, you can avoid all responsibility as a member of the legislature. As mayor, you can't avoid any responsibility. But in this case, they took responsibility away from you or your predecessor. And that's of great concern to us. Now, if I can turn to, can I call you Dr. Mona? It's my understanding that we call you Dr. Mona. I know you have treated cases of lead poisoning in the past, and I know you were very involved in checking up on the Walters children, as I understand it. I wanted to ask you, in your experience, is the health system in Flint prepared to handle and respond to the needs of children that have now lead exposure, but who in the future, as I'm sorry I can't call your name, but the 10 or 20 or 30 years that we're going to be looking out for the consequences of this. And Dr. Mona, you mentioned something about Head Start and not special education. My wife was very involved in that, but I was sworn into the Maryland State Senate in 1966, before you were born probably, and Ted Agnew was elected governor of Maryland, and he had a line that I've always remembered in his state of the, or in his inaugural address. He said, "The cost of failure far exceeds the price of progress." $100 per day to prevent the corrosive impact was saved. $36,500 a year. $365,000 for 10 years. The cost of failure is going to far exceed the price of making sure that the water that was being served to the people of Flint who relied on their public health service, on their Department of Environmental Quality, that they were kept safe, and they didn't do that. What is your thought about the capacity to deal with the long term on your own?
Yeah, we need help. We need to build that capacity, and that is what this Michigan State University Hurley Children's Hospital Pediatric Public Health Initiative wants to be. We want to be this center of excellence, this model public health program to care for these children, to research this exposure, and to intervene so that we do not see those consequences. But we need help. We don't have the capacity. We need the resources to do that. And we also know the cost of not doing that. The cost of lead poisoning as a nation is about $50 to $100 billion a year. If you add up decreased lifetime earnings, special education costs, criminal justice costs, medical treatment, that is what we will have to pay in the future if we don't pay a little bit now. So we are not asking for that much money. We need an investment now so we don't have to pay later. But no, we need to build that capacity.
Well, Madam Mayor and Dr. Mona and all of you at the table, let me reiterate the comments that I know you've heard from Dan Kildee. I will tell you, the Michigan delegation has been on this so hard and so conscientiously, and have educated us all to the issues and to, frankly, the responsibility of this. So I congratulate all of you for being here, for fighting this fight, and to echo Mr. Crowley's remarks that we're in that fight with you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I believe that there was a question directed to Madam Mayor from Mr. Becerra.
Yes. Well, some of the question One of the questions you ask is the same question that we have about who knew what and when they knew it. That's one of the things that we have always asked for in the city of Flint is for accountability, because that is just so important. And while I know there are investigations going on, I'm very happy that there are investigations going on because we need those answers. I have chosen to let the investigators do their job, and I've been focused on what do we need to do to move Flint forward. As far as my time with the governor, I try to work with him because he is the governor, and that's what I have to do as an elected official. I have requested, and what we have talked about have been weekly meetings together. Now, as far as what they want to have happen, we've had enough of them telling us what's best for the city of Flint. And so that was why I put a plan forward. We cannot wait for them to make decisions about us and for us. We need to speak up and speak out on behalf of our own community. And so that's the posture, the stance that I have taken is I don't want them planning for us. I want the money. I want to help put the plan that we have come up with forward. So that's what I'm working on. One of the other things that came, and somebody asked me, I wrote down the questions about feeling like, does somebody have our back? One of the things that has happened is because of this outpouring from people, whether it's they show up in Flint, whether they send us something, we have felt like people are having our back now because we have been in this for such a long time by ourselves. And for over a year, we cried and screamed and hollered. It started with affordable water, and it moved to clean water. So this has been tremendous for our emotional and our mental health, because to know someone is caring about us and thinking about us and working on our behalf just lifts our spirits, and we need that as well as the funding to do what we need to do for our community. The last thing, I think I wrote the last thing down was, yes, it has been difficult to work with no power. I'm starting to get it back, but it's a hard thing to do when you walk in and you feel like you're alone. People have said, what can you do differently? And this is the first time I've prided myself on having a big mouth, because I said one thing I will always do is speak up and speak out, and I will let them know if they don't support the things that I'm doing. I will be in front of the TV every single day saying, here's what I think needs to happen, and they won't let me. So that's how I've been dealing with this. And I have gotten so much support from the Michigan delegation and from the Conference of Mayors and all of you here, so I just need to thank you for that.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Talking about effective from the start, the mayor's office 2 months when this descended upon her. Thank you for your great leadership. To our distinguished panel, we'll now hear from the chair of the Congressional Black Caucus, Mr. Butterfield. Bobby Scott, as was referenced, the ranking Democrat on the Education and Labor Committee, Head Start, so many of the initiatives that have been mentioned over and over again here, and Marcy Kaptur of Ohio. Thank you so much, my colleagues, for joining us. Mr. Butterfield.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Leader Pelosi, for convening this extraordinary hearing today. Thank you for your leadership, and thanks goes out to Representative Donna Edwards as well for convening all of us today to...
Excuse me, Donna had to go to the floor. She has a motion to recommit on the floor. She will be back. If I may just acknowledge Mr. Chaka Fattah, who has joined us since we began. Mr. Butterfield, forgive my interruption.
So thank you, Leader Pelosi, and I thank Representative Edwards in her absence. She will be returning in just a few minutes, but thank both of you for convening this hearing today to address this unthinkable crisis. What has happened in Flint, Michigan should touch the heart of anyone in the world who has compassion for others, and especially for those who care for the well-being and safety of our children. The 46 members of the Congressional Black Caucus were among the first. After consulting with Representative Kildee and Representative Brenda Lawrence and others, we were among the first to demand a thorough federal investigation of the Flint water crisis, and we will be among those visiting your city to further amplify the urgency of the moment. But more must be done to ensure that the families impacted by this crisis are made whole again. Not partial restoration, but they must be made whole again. There was a clear lack of oversight and accountability. And yes, short-term efforts and bottled water are helpful. But this crisis, as you have said so eloquently, Madam Mayor and others, this crisis demands much more. And so the state of Michigan has an obligation to resolve this emergency that the citizens face. In the coming weeks, the Congressional Black Caucus will travel to Flint, Michigan. Not all of us, but a delegation from our group will travel to your great city to hear from those who are most impacted by this travesty. And so I'm not going to ask any questions, Madam Leader. I'm just going to close by saying that we just want you to know, as Mr. Hoyer and others have said, we just want you to know that this committee, this Steering and Policy Committee, which is the leadership of the House Democratic Caucus, we want you to know that the Congressional Black Caucus stands with you during this moment of crisis, and we will do everything within our power to see that justice is realized in your community. God bless you. Thank you for your strength. I yield back.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Scott.
Thank you, Madam Leader, and I thank you, Donna Edwards, Lord Rosa DeLauro, Mr. Hoyer, and other leaders for convening us. In 1954, the Supreme Court said in Brown v. Board of Education that it is doubtful that any child may reasonably be expected to succeed in life if denied the opportunity of an education. Such an opportunity is a right which must be made available to all on equal terms. Unfortunately, actions by government officials will deny the children of Flint, Michigan that equal educational opportunity unless we take remedial action to offset to the extent possible the effects of these government decisions. Now, the research, and we've heard some of it today, the research is clear on the impact of exposure of lead on children. The research is also clear on how we can address these challenges, and we have to ensure that our youngest children are provided with those proper interventions. Now, those interventions will take place in a lot of different agencies: Army Corps of Engineers, Health and Human Services, Criminal Justice, a lot of different agencies. But I'm the ranking member of the Committee on Education and the Workforce, and we've started looking at some interventions that ought to take place just within our committee's jurisdiction. We've heard of the effects of early learning. Only 20% of the children of Flint are now in Head Start. We need to make that 100%. Special education, job training, child nutrition programs, programs that provide wraparound supports and interventions that will be crucial to mitigating the long-term harmful effects. And we're looking into that, and we've just come up, and it's obvious that that number will be in the billions by the time we finish. This is the damage caused by the callous decisions of government officials. We owe it to the victims to make sure that we mitigate the damages to the extent possible. So I'm going to ask the witnesses to provide if you could provide to Dan or your representatives, the kinds of initiatives that will be necessary within the area of education. And others will be asking for other kinds of interventions that are needed to make sure that the children get the kind of services that they desperately need and deserve. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Madam Leader, for convening all of us, and I thank my colleagues, Dan Kildee and Brenda Lawrence, Congresswoman Dingell as well, and Sandra Levin and John Conyers. Mayor Weaver, it's good to see you again. Thank you very much for being here, and all of the esteemed witnesses today. Everyone has talked about long-term solutions, and I support all of those. I'm going to focus my brief questions on short-term needs. One dealing with water, another nutrition, and the third medical. First question, and any panelist who can answer, please answer. Has the governor of the state of Michigan offered or been asked to use the full power of the Michigan National Guard to install a temporary water distribution system with water buffaloes and above-ground PVC tubing under pressure to serve schools, hospitals, and residences? And in addition, has the Guard been ordered or asked to deploy portable shower chambers with warm water at all schools and other key locations? Number two, in terms of nutrition, because as Dr. Hanna-Attisha has stated, it's so important in healing, what would be the most effective manner to help your city achieve good nutrition as a critical ingredient of short and long-term healing? And Dr. Hanna-Attisha, can you write prescriptions for nutritious foods? And where would your citizens in that instance obtain that food? And finally, you have stated 40% of the children and appointments are no-shows. Who is in charge of expediting and organizing the immediate medical examination of all children and adults for screenings and care in your community?
Well, I can speak for the school level. The temporary water dispensers have not been installed.
I'll tell you, when I went to Flint last weekend, I was shocked. I was simply shocked at what was not there. And I don't know what's been asked. I'm not from your state. But the fact that those temporary water systems were not in place was very troubling to me. The fact that portable shower units were not available with warm water. This is an infraction of the duty of the state, the governor of the state. And you simply have to go, they have to become engaged. And I was so angry when I left. I called the White House yesterday and I said, federalize the Guard. I said, get that assistance to them. They said, well, Marcy, you know, that might be overkill. Well, their children aren't affected. So I'm just saying, I think that there's a role there that can be very constructive. Somebody ought to walk down that path, and we ought to achieve it. Members like myself, I serve on defense. I just am shocked at what was not there.
I've just been informed that pretty soon we'll have to leave for votes for Mrs. Edwards' initiative that is on the floor. So in that spirit, as you respond to the questions, well, Mr. Butterfield didn't have a question, a statement. Mr. Scott asked for information for the record and for his committee, and Ms. Capter was very clear about any information you can supply to her about it. We did hear earlier, Marcy, as you know, about the farmer's market and the fact that there are no grocery stores readily available with fresh produce in the area, and we have that on the record as well.
Madam Leader?
Yes.
Might I just say, having been involved in agriculture for a long time and knowing the power of Michigan State University and the U.S. Department of Agriculture, I also hope you can provide income for your community by growing some of your own food.
We're working
and
on it.
programs like EQIP and so forth. Good. All right.
Working on it.
And you just made me think about something because you were talking about the way we are using the National Guard. And I don't believe this ask has been put in what you've talked about. And so we will do that. But the other thing we've talked about is they are paying the National Guard $2 million to do dispensing of water, and we have a community with high unemployment, and we could be utilizing our own residents and paying them something, and it wouldn't have to be what they're paying. You know, that's $250 a day that they pay. We have people in our own community that need to be part of this solution and part of taking care of themselves, and that would be a way for us to employ some people, even if it's for a year or however long it takes, and that's one of the requests that we've made as well.
Excellent suggestion, Mayor. You have a friend here to try to help you.
Thank you.
I have one other piece I want to lift. We're going to have a serious challenge moving forward with how do we begin to attract those teachers to Flint Community Schools in light of this crisis. That is a challenge for us when we talk about folks having our children's back. Many times it's a teacher. And also, based on our current data for Flint Community Schools, it looks as if by 2019, we're only going to have 3,800 kids in our district. How do we change that story? Because with this crisis, I'm sure that number is going to look totally different moving forward. So what's going to be the game changer for our children in Flint Community Schools?
Now, in the interest of time, because of the vote that is pending, coming on the floor, Mr. Grijalva, Mr. Cartwright, Mr. Welsh, Mr. Swalwell, Ms. Schakowsky, I got them, Mr. Mr. Hoffman, we're doing an order of arrival. That was the only way we could do. Ms. Lee, Ms. Waters, Mr. Ellison, and Mr. Fatah. Did we get everyone? Oh, Mr. Green, you come in before Ms. Schakowsky. Okay, and I'll tell you when. Okay, so right now, Grijalva, Cartwright, Welsh, if you would like to make your statements or pose your questions. Thank you so much for being here. Mr. Grijalva, as I mentioned, is the ranking member on the Natural Resources Committee. Mr. Grijalva, thank you.
Thank you very much. And I just want to thank the panelists and you, Madam Leader, and the Michigan delegation for not only educating us, but for putting this issue front and center, not only of Congress, but of the American people. And to the panelists, thank you so much. It's an environmental justice issue. And it impacts towns, cities, and communities and neighborhoods all across this country, what is going on in Flint. But Flint is the issue. Somebody called it the canary in the cage, that I think is going to set precedents in how you deal with this issue where poor communities, communities of color, end up carrying the brunt of callous neglect, abuse of power, discrimination with regard to how we deal with those individuals, those children, and those structural deficits that you mentioned, sir. I think that one of the things that we hope to work with you on and with our colleagues from Michigan is dealing with that environmental justice issue, the metrics, the procedures, and the legislation that could be possible, so that we offer a layer of legal protection codified in law to communities down the road, but to Flint in particular, the precedents and how we respond to this human crisis on the part of this country is going to set a tone and a precedent down the road for so many other communities. But again, Madam Leader, thank you so much.
Thank you. Cartwright.
Thank you, Madam Leader, and thank you to the Steering Policy Committee for inviting me here today, and to the witnesses for showing up, particularly you, the hero, Dr. Hanna-Attisha of Flint. I sat in the Oversight and Government Reform Committee meeting a week ago. Congressman Lawrence was there, and a number of us were there, and I heard the testimony about how the water was switched to the Flint River, something 19 times more corrosive than the Lake Huron water. I listened to how they saved $100 a day by not using the anti-corrosive agent. I heard how the Michigan officials lied to the EPA about whether they were using those anti-corrosive materials. I heard about how they tried to discredit you, the Michigan officials did, Dr. Hanna-Attisha, is that right? Mm-hmm. And I asked, where was Governor Snyder? And nobody had an answer. And I understand he was invited to today's hearing right here, and he didn't come. He has a lot of questions to answer right here in Washington, D.C., and I'm amazed. I'm amazed that he has continued to hide. And I felt myself getting angry because, after all, what we're talking about is the breakdown of a philosophy of government. It's something that Dan Kildee has talked about, and I couldn't be more proud of Representative Kildee, the way he's been sleepless, the way he's been sticking up for Flint. But it's a philosophy of government where we save money and we cut government and we cut and we cut and we cut. And it's the tea people. I call them the shutdown crowd. They came in. That's when the governor came in 2010 with the tea people, and they immediately took your authority away, Mayor Weaver, well, your predecessor. And I understand there was actually a referendum in Michigan that reversed that decision, and then the governor went and pulled some shenanigans and hijinks and reworked it and put the emergency manager's reign of control over your city back in. Is that what happened, Mayor Weaver?
Yes.
Yeah, so you have the people that want to, and these are people that got elected. Governor Snyder ran on family values in 2010. You remember that? And I say to people who are angry about the direction this country is taking, be angry about what happened in Flint. be angry about these people whose philosophy of government is cut it, cut it, cut it until it can't operate, and then when something goes wrong, blame the government that they cut.
Thank you, Mr. Cartwright. Thank
I
you,
yield
Mr.
back.
Welch.
Thank you all very much. Mayor Weaver, are you still under receivership by the state?
We are still in receivership.
And the people of Flint, would they like to have their authority and responsibility and their mayor back in charge?
Yes. Yes, that's one of the things we've talked about. It's been very interesting because they've been giving me back a little at a time.
And you
I
need
said,
it all.
We
You
need
want
it all.
responsibility and authority.
Yes.
Yeah.
We want complete responsibility and authority, not partial.
Well, like my colleagues, I want to thank you. You know, Flint's had tough times. Dan Kildee, has been mentioned, is a proud son of Flint, and we know its glory days. But what's really moving to me is to see you here, and you love Flint. And the challenges that are there are ones you're willing to face, but you've got to be given the authority to do it. Doctor, I want to go to that. I want to go to that farmer's market and walk
Awesome.
upstairs.
Yeah, we do give nutrition prescriptions too.
Just very quickly, what do these kids need? I don't have much time, but what do these kids who have been exposed to lead poisoning need, and how long do they need it?
They need it forever. So this is a decade-long, multi-generational problem. They need these wraparound services. They need nutrition now, diets high in iron, calcium, vitamin C now, and then they need long-term nutrition access.
And intervention now really makes a difference tomorrow.
Absolutely. The early education now, you won't have to pay for special education now. The mental health services now, the trauma-informed care, because this is a community absolutely traumatized. Think of PTSD in the entire community. So all of these interventions now will mitigate the effects later.
Well, we're all in. And
Thank you.
thank you so much for everything you've done.
Thank you very much, and we have so much member participation. We have a vote coming in about 15 minutes, and so if we are really diligent, we can get to each one of the members if they take their 2 minutes. So Mr. Swalwell, then Mr. Green, and then Ms. Lee.
Thank you, Madam Leader and Chairwoman Edwards. Also, I just want to assure the people of Flint that your representative, Dan Kildee, has been standing up every day on this issue and also an issue with an Iranian hostage that he was able to work so hard to bring home. But when I hear the stories from the panelists, I think that this is something that could happen to any city in America when corners are cut. No city is immune to something like this happening if we cut corners to try and save costs. And so often, lately, we have heard through the presidential campaign dialogue, less government, less government, less government. And when we have less and less government, consequences are our health and safety. And that has been seen here. But I want to just assure you that every member of this panel, and this is an extraordinary number of members of Congress to show up for this issue, is here because we know this could happen in our communities, and we want to show you that we are standing with Flint and our colleague Dan Kildee. But what I'd be interested in is what can you take away, what have you taken away from this that we can report back to our local water agencies and city councils? What lesson would you say you've learned? What red flags could we point them to in case we see this come to our community?
Well, I know one of the things that I hope is a lesson learned, because if we don't learn a lesson from Flint, then we have failed. So one of the lessons learned, and I know Dr. Mona talked about it, as did others, as far as what we need to be looking at. We know we have an infrastructure issue. We also know that the standards that are in place as far as water quality are not where they should be. So people were able to say we are meeting standards, but those standards were set too low. I also hope, as far as what has gone on with our schools and knowing that we need new fixtures in there, that people are looking at what's going on with the water. I hope that they are setting new standards for quality. I hope that they're testing more frequently, because if we don't do those things, then we haven't learned anything from this lesson.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you to the panelists.
Thank
Yield
you.
back.
And we'll go to Mr. Green, Mr. Lee, and Ms. Waters.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I thank the leader as well and all of the members of the Michigan delegation. Friends, we are witnessing a great American tragedy unfold before our very eyes. And this is not a tragedy wherein a corporation has performed a dastardly deed. The dastard in this circumstance is the government. The government has polluted water. The government is causing children to be poisoned. This is the government, actions of the government. And if the government does this, we have a responsibility, a duty, and an obligation to make it right. History will not be kind to us if we do not do all that is within our power to make this right. We have the power to do it. The question is, will we have the will to do what is right for people that the government has harmed? I yield back.
Thank you. Ms. Lee?
Thank you very much. Let me first thank Leader Pelosi, Congresswoman Edwards, DeLauro, also Congressman Kildee and Brenda Lawrence, Congresswoman Lawrence, for this hearing and for your response, your immediate response to how we all can help not only raise awareness with regard to this emergency, but what we can actually do to help mitigate some of the terrible, terrible consequences. Now, let me just say, I want to first thank the panel for being here and say to you that you're very brave and bold, and we appreciate just taking a day to come be with us to help us clarify our agenda and how we need to move forward. I have to wonder, though, if the same decisions that led to this crisis would have been made in an affluent community. Now, communities of color and low-income communities have been historically victimized by environmental injustice and racism, and as a result have lower life expectancies, negative health outcomes and impacts. These last for a generation. And our response to Flint, it must be a whole-of-government response and address the, of course, immediate problems of infrastructure, the health and mental health needs, the nutrition needs, all of those issues that you have raised today. But also we have to look at the long-term issues underlying this, and those are the issues of poverty, inequality, and racial injustice. Now, long-term mental health needs, Madam Mayor, you mentioned, and also many of you mentioned the psychological effects and mental health effects, but I'm wondering, in our response and in your response, looking at what are these children going to grow up, how are they going to feel in terms of self-esteem and knowing that their government made decisions that are diminishing their value as children and as Americans, and how do we look at mental health within that broader context to make sure that our kids in Flint don't move through this with the physical damage that they're going to encounter, but also the low self-esteem and the fact that someone diminished them and devalued them as children. And finally, let me just ask you, immediate needs, I know many in our districts, clergy, organizations, individuals want to do something right now. Do you have a list of responses that need to be made right now that our district and our constituents could respond to, that we could go home? I mean, everyone in my district in Oakland, California, and the East Bay, and I'm sure in your district, Madam Leader, want to know what we can do right now. Thank you again.
And of course, if so, we would appreciate hearing from the mayor and other leaders about that more directly. We'll hear from Ms. Waters and Mr. Ellison. And then we'll, the chair of the Progressive Caucus and our Democratic ranking member on financial services.
Thank you very much, Ms. Edwards and Leader Pelosi, for this hearing. And let me thank all of our witnesses who are here today for your presence here and for the role that you have all played in helping to educate the world about what has happened in Flint. One of my colleagues said we should be angry about what has happened. I'm mad as hell. I'm mad as hell, and I'll tell you why. Each day, many of us wake up to some more bad news about what's happening to poor people, what's happening to people of color, whether it is the continued killing of young black males, unarmed, in custody, whether it is problems with the criminal justice system in general and the incarceration of African Americans. I'm old enough to have come along for many years looking at what happens to our children in special education. And we know now that there's a direct pipeline from special education to prison. We understand all of that. I've worked in Head Start. I know what we can and what we cannot do. And again, each day we are hearing another bad news story. And, you know, to tell you the truth, I thought that perhaps we had conquered the lead problem because we had discovered that lead was in the paint of all of these old buildings and public housing and all of that. And I thought we had gotten on top of that issue. And to hear that this is a man-made problem that was discovered in Flint is heartbreaking. And so, members of the panel, members of steering and policy, I don't care where the money comes from. I want the money both from the state and from the federal government. Right. And I want it fast. I appreciate all of the bottles of waters that's being brought by entertainers and everybody else, but that doesn't solve the problem. It's temporary. Right. And I want our government to react the same way we reacted with Ebola and other, you know, emergencies. This is an emergency. And while we are all composed up here, I want to tell you our hearts are breaking. And in addition to wanting that money and putting pressure both here on this administration and on the state, I want to tell you, I am not as nice and easy as some of my colleagues. We need to shut the governor's office down. We need to shut it down and have an appreciation for what Black Lives Matters are teaching us. People don't hear us because we're too nice. And we need a little confrontation here. And so, leave here understanding you have a lot of support, and Dan Kildee and Brenda Lawrence have been telling us, we want some federal money. And so we're listening, and we agree with them, and in addition to whatever pressure we're trying to put on the governor, who's tone deaf, I understand, we want the federal government to move to an emergency. We have to treat it like an emergency. And so I'm going to come up with the Black Caucus. I don't know if you all really want me up there or not.
Yeah, we do.
But I'm coming.
We do.
And when I come, it is not because I want to sit around and ask people, how bad off are you? I understand and I know already how bad off people are. And while I appreciate, and we know we have to do the interventions, every child for I don't know how many years should be tested. And we need to know what the actual protocols are for correcting the damage that has been done. And I think it is monumental. So, bless you all. Thank you all for being here. Let's treat this like an emergency. And I appreciate your loud voice, Madam Mayor, but I want a lot of more loud voices with you and some action. And believe me, again, if you all don't want me to come, let me know. Let me know now, because I don't intend to be nice. I yield back the balance of my time. I don't need any more time. That's it. Thank you.
Mr. Ellison, and then I see that Representative Sheila Jackson-Lee has joined us from Texas. But we do have a vote that's called, and so, Mr. Ellison.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Let me thank the panel again. So on March 4th, members of the Progressive Caucus, which I co-chair, and the Black Caucus, and Dan Kildee, and others want to come to Flint to hear directly from people who are directly impacted. I'd like to know from you, do you think this is a valuable thing to do? I believe there's a lot of genius and smarts in Flint that can help solve this problem and have been over the course of time. And so we will be there March 4th, and we want to join you there. And I just want to ask a question of you, Dr. Mona. Is it true that you immigrated to the United States?
Yes, I'm an Iraqi-American first-generation immigrant.
And I bring that out because we are in a political environment that I think that's already been alluded to, where the contributions of people who've immigrated to our country have been deprecated by some, particularly people who immigrate from the Middle East. And I want to say thank you for you and everything you've done on this, and I want to say thank you to everybody here, including you, Dr. Mona, and Mayor Weaver. Thank you for your valiant fight. I guess if there's one question I have, and I've tried to study this issue, I would really love to know how deeply implicated this emergency manager law is. We know it is, but I'd like to get real specific on how much damage this kind of legislating has done, because I think it really has brought us to this emergency situation. You know, my brother was born in Flint. My father practiced medicine in Flint. I'm from Detroit, Michigan originally, and I'll see y'all in Flint on March 4th. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ellison. Ms. Jackson-Lee, if you could just take 1 minute, and then we'll allow the panel to respond to the question. Thank you.
First of all, let me thank the Steering and Policy Committee for its leadership, and let me point out, if I might, Mayor Weaver, and of course, Congressman Kildee, Congressman Lawrence, and the entire Michigan delegation, thank you for allowing me to be there on Saturday to listen to your constituents, Mayor, but also to see your leadership. Dr. Mona, thank you for being the voice of power. I was going to say reason, but you didn't need to be reasonable. I just want to make this point, and that is, I am baffled, and I continue to say, how an emergency manager that, to my knowledge, if all you could just answer, to my knowledge, had no scientific background, could make a decision of choosing a different water source with no testing, no plan, and whether or not anyone thinks, not knowing if I'm speaking to any lawyers, whether that is certainly malfeasance. The other mayor that I'd ask you, because you've been eloquent in saying your people need resources, which we want to help, and your congressman is leading on that, and your senators. The $195 million, I think that's the number that seems to, every time you host us or someone comes, the governor ramps up a few pennies. Can you explain whether that answers all of your concerns, particularly with the piping that is needed, the medical care that is needed? And I just want to show the emails that were produced by the governor, most of which you cannot read, and they have been redacted. And so I just want to say my issue is whether or not there is more than malfeasance. But I would appreciate if you would answer that, since I saw these sick children and I'm just overwhelmed. Thank you very much. I yield back for answers.
I want to yield to the leader, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Sheila, for your question. A number of these questions have been posed for the record and have been answered for the record. And if we're going to have anything that you want to submit placed in the record, it'll be part of our documentation of this hearing. I just want to say a few things and then give you the last word. First of all, I was proud to appoint Mr. Kildee to the Steering and Policy Committee, and enabling him to preside on this hearing and to have that base of support within our caucus to operate from, working with the Michigan delegation, Congresswoman Lawrence, Congresswoman Dingell, Congressman Levin, Congressman Conyers. I have some appreciation for the mayor's house, as Tom Cochran knows, being raised in one and being my brother being mayor. So I appreciate, Madam Mayor, your tremendous leadership. I want to thank each member of the panel, Madam Mayor, certainly Mayor Weaver, Dr. Tawwab, Dr. Scorsone, lots of doctors today. Did I call you a doctor, Mr. Tawwab? It's okay. Dr. Lambrinidou, Dr. Hanna-Attisha, thank all of you. I've been in Congress 28 years. I've been part of many committee hearings over time. I can't remember one that touched our hearts more deeply, that challenged our conscience more firmly, and that informed us more clearly than what you have done today. Thank you. I know that this is just an example of the leadership you are providing in the community. You honor us with your presence, and we are the better for it in terms of what decisions we have to make and how, following the lead of our Michigan delegation and Mr. Kildee, where we have to go from here. This is not a conversation. This is not a hearing that will end. This is a launch for us into action. So we will act upon your testimony. We're grateful for it and want to each of you respond. And I know that some of the questions have overlapped because members have come and gone. You've placed answers to all of them on the record already, but whatever closing remarks you would like to make. And with that, I yield to Congresswoman Edwards.
Thank you very much, and let's just hear from the panels and the panel, and then we will close it out. And so we'll give each of you an opportunity to close. Madam Mayor, begin with you.
Okay, thank you. I won't go over the ones that have already been answered, but I do just want to say that our community has been traumatized. As I was saying, we are not a disposable people. We deserve equal protection under the law. Safe and clean water is a basic right to all people, including the citizens and the residents of Flint, Michigan. We need you all on this journey to restore clean water to Flint and restore trust and confidence to our community that has been poisoned by this man-made disaster. I thank you for your leadership, your support, your voice. It helps us keep pressure on the state, on the governor. It helps for accountability, and it keeps the spotlight on Flint. So we welcome you all coming because it lifts us emotionally and mentally, and that's what the citizens of Flint need. So I just want to thank you all for bringing this issue to the forefront again and putting it elevating it to a completely different level. That is what we need, and it's what we deserve. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Tawwab.
I, too, want to say thank you. As I stated previously, we've been going with bottled water since September, and the level of donations from around the country have been amazing. So I once again want to say thank you to that. But we're now beyond bottled water. It's now time for that long-term plan, that conversation. And so that's where we are. We are posting options on our website where folks can begin to volunteer their time and begin to focus on certain aspects such as literacy moving forward. So that will be posted on our district website. And around the mental health piece, I would say that's definitely a major area of concern for all of us moving forward. And I think one thing that is key now is that our kids have to understand that this is not normal. This simply is not normal. Thank you for this opportunity.
Mr. Scorsone, Dr. Scorsone.
Thank you. Thank you for the committee for holding these hearings. I would just say simply that the mayor and the council need the support of the state and federal government so that the city can provide adequate basic municipal services on an ongoing basis, because it is going to challenge them greatly to do so.
Thank you for the opportunity. As unthinkable and shocking as the situation that we're in today is, unfortunately, what I have to say is that it is of no surprise to those of us who were here 12 years ago in very similar hearings, talking about the same issues and begging for help for our residents here in DC. This is a repeat for us. And what I'd like to point out is that serious lead in water problems can occur and do occur not only as a result of a complete lack of corrosion control treatment, which is what happened in Flint, but there are many other reasons. There's inadequate corrosion control treatment and lots of other conditions that can create these very serious lead in water contaminations. In Flint, we had that. But we also had the flawed testing that went on. We had testing with pre-flushing happening. We had the wrong homes being targeted. And we know that today, other cities in Michigan and cities around the country are using these same exact sampling protocols to sample for lead and are issuing assurances just like MDQ did, and just like the city of Flint did, that everything is okay with the water. I urge us and I plea this committee here to be using Flint as a lesson, to be looking right now at other communities. This is not a question of let's take lessons to prevent something else maybe possibly in the future. It's let's take these lessons to address this problem now nationally. Other kids are being hurt today. Please, let's do something about it. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Hanna-Attisha.
Thank you so much for listening to us. We have not been listened to for about 18 months as a community, and we are finally being heard. Thank you. On behalf of the kids, thank you. So the only fault of these children in Flint were that they happened to live in a poor city that was almost bankrupt, that changed their drinking water, and they didn't treat it. And now they have potential lifelong consequences of this. We need to invest in them. We are a great nation, and we need to invest in our community and build it back up, and we cannot do it alone. So please help us, because we can be a model nation. We can be a model city. We need to bring hope back into our children. We need to build resilience, and that will help their mental health, and that will help their future, and that will help buffer the impact of this exposure. So let us build a resilient community.
Thank you, and I'd like to recognize Congressman Kildee.
Well, first of all, thank you, Madam Leader and Madam Chair, for this hearing, and thanks to the witnesses. You're my friends, you're the people I've worked with, you're my neighbors, and anybody who has listened knows that we have great reason to be proud of the people of Flint, because you represent them so well. And we have the capacity to fix this problem. We just need the resources to do it, and we have a moral claim on those resources. And I just thank you for helping to make that case, and I thank my colleagues for being there and having the back of the people of Flint. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, and this concludes our hearing today of the Steering and Policy Committee. On behalf of my colleague and co-chair, Rosa DeLauro, and Leader Pelosi, thank you to each of the witnesses who here today for your testimony, for enlightening us, and for inspiring us, and for calling us to action, and that's our next step. Madam Mayor, thank you very much for your very impressive leadership, even from afar, as we've watched you try to guide the citizens of Flint through this crisis. So thank you for your leadership and the entire team here. I want to recognize as well our colleagues from Michigan, the Michigan delegation, because they've spent the time in this hearing and every single day focused on this issue, led by, of course, our colleague Dan Kildee, Debbie Dingle, and Brenda Lawrence, Sandra Levin, and John Conyers. We appreciate their guidance and their leadership. We were joined today by over 30 members of the Democratic Caucus here in this committee. That is a demonstration to you that from all across the country, we stand with the people of Flint, and most especially with those 9,000 children, and we absolutely promise that we will not let you down. So thank you, and this concludes the hearing, and we're adjourned.